system capacity in equivalent units. The water SDC update. Here we're looking at a total existing investment of about $44.8 million and a net future investment of $10.6 million for a total cost basis of $55.4 million. If we divide that by the estimated system capacity in ERUs of 10,135, gets us a charge of $5,471 per ERU compared to the existing charge of $3,081 per ERU. The table on the bottom shows how the charge would increase for the various meter sizes, which is consistent with how the city currently imposes its water SDCs. One thing that I wanted to point out since the last presentation, the updated SDC represents an increase of 78% over the current SDC. If the city had been adjusting the 2004 charge by inflation, it would have increased by 82% between 2004 and now. So it is worth noting that this is not an insignificant increase, but it is less than what we would get if you had just done inflationary increases every year. Onto the storm drain SDC. Here we've got an existing cost basis of $5.4 million, a future cost basis of about $900,000 for a total cost basis of $6.3 million. We divide that by the system capacity of 16,777 ERUs, and we get a charge of $377 per ERU. And so there is no existing charge, so no real context for like a percent increase or anything like that. But nevertheless, this is what the SDC would look like. The sewer SDC. Here, the conversation gets a bit more interesting. We have almost $88 million in existing investment, and that includes the clean water facility, but net of the outstanding debt principal. So we're not charging customers for the full cost of the facility in the SDC and then charging them again for the cost and what they pay in rates for the debt service. So we have a net investment of $87.6 million, about $1.5 million of future costs for a total cost basis of $89 million. And then we divide that by the system capacity of 9,681 ERUs to get a total charge of $9,200 per ERU compared to the existing charge of $1,680. And so just kind of summarizing the key bullet points behind the increase, if we had adjusted for inflation as a rough approximation of assets that had been added and the interest that had been accrued on those assets, the inflation would have been 131% since 1996. So we would be looking at a charge of $3,800, $3,900 per ERU. If we look at the investment in the clean water facility, net of outstanding debt, we'd be looking at an additional $3,250 per ERU. And then if we look at the 2013 wastewater facilities plan and the capacity that it estimated compared to the current NPDES permit, the current estimate of capacity is 18% lower. So effectively, if we took the 3877 and we added the 3250 for the clean water facility, and then we increased the resulting amount by 18% to recognize the 18% change in the denominator, we're getting fairly close to that $9,200. We're somewhere in the $8,000 range. So, I mean, these are rough factors, but pointing at the fact that a substantial increase is due, or at least justified. However, that's stuff that we largely discussed last time. You expressed concerns about the impacts of charging the full sewer SDC on the development of affordable housing. And so there are a few alternatives. One would be charge less than the full cost SDC, but keep the structure intact. Another approach would be change how ERUs are defined to reduce the SDC per ERU. However, that would potentially impact other types of development. For example, if we were to assign 1 ERU per dwelling unit for multifamily, our number of ERUs would go up and our charge per ERU would go down, but it would significantly increase what multifamily development has to pay. So it's keeping the same cost and just shifting it around as to who pays it. And then the third alternative that we'll get into here is scaling the single-family sewer SDC based on house size. This is particularly appropriate for the sewer SDC because it's indicative of the expected number of occupants and expected wastewater flow as a result. And expected flow better represents impact to the sewer system than water meter size. So water meters are sized to deal with peak demands, which are driven by outdoor use and other usage that doesn't necessarily equate to sewer flow. And then the sewer system is just driven by flow, and it's also driven by inflow and infiltration during the winter months, which is not related to customer use. So using this expected flow basis is appropriate for sewer. Another keynote here, charging less than the full cost SDC shifts cost to ratepayers. And so there was a study, and I consulted with my colleague, John Gorducci, on this based on some work that he's done in the Oregon area. There was a study done by Portland that looked at the occupancy by house size. And we see typically the smallest number of expected occupants is 1. And so that's kind of at the low end in terms of the number of occupants based on home size. And there's a positive correlation between house size and the number of occupants up to about 2,600 square feet. And then once you get above 2,600 square feet, the number of occupants stays roughly flat. I mean, and that's just indicative that the largest homes are driven by other things than occupancy. Like somebody has a really large yard or a large lot or something else that doesn't necessarily mean that the home size by number of occupants is materially different. And so we put together a sewer SDC calculation based on the scaled approach. And Dave provided an inventory of parcels in the city, and we were able to get the average size of a single-family home in Oak Harbor, and it's roughly 1,800 square feet. And so if we were to equate the full cost sewer SDC of $9,200 per ERU to a charge per square foot, we would get $5.11. And so now, based on that, we've come up with a tiered structure based on house size. And so kind of the minimum occupant size, be it 750 square feet, anything up to that, based on the parcel data that the city had, the estimated living area was about 650 square feet on average, which would correspond to about 0.36 ERUs. And I guess I should start at the 1,800 square foot range. Basically, we've said anything from 1,401 to 1,800 square feet would be 1 ERU. That's kind of the standard single family. And then we have tiers that deviate from that. So anything up to 750 would be 36 ERUs. Anything from 751 to 1,400 would be 0.65. Anything from 1,801 to 2,600 would be 1.17 ERUs. And then anything larger than 2,600 feet would really be capped at 2,600 square feet of living area based on that relationship from that Portland study. And so we assign 1.44 ERUs, based on that. And so then if you look at the full cost sewer SDC, what we did was just said $9,200 for between 14 and 1,800 square feet, and then scaled based on those ERU factors. And then the column on the far right is called the alternative capped SDC. What we did there was we scaled it down a little bit so that basically for anything up to 2,600 square feet, the maximum SDC would be $9,200, and then anything above 2,600 could be more than that. So based on that, we have some phasing options here. The first option would be full cost, and basically this would be consistent with what we already presented. This would keep the meter size basis and go up to the full $9,200 for a 3/4 inch meter effective in March. And then the second option would be looking at the scaled approach and front loading the increase. And so here we set the charge for a home between 14 and 1,800 square feet at 6,100 is that first step, and then getting to that alternate capped level of 7,863 by March of 2025. And then The rest of them just scale accordingly based on the ERU factors on the previous slide. And then the third option would be keep the same target from 2025, but instead of front-loading the increase, doing it in 3 even steps. And so then that's what we see there. Then for non-single family, basically keeping the standard 1,400 to 1,800 square foot home being an ERU, kind of keeping that as the 3/4 inch base charge for and then scaling up with meter size based on the meter factors. But the options are conceptually the same and tied to that single family charge. And so then to show the SDC survey for those different options, the existing one is at the bottom. The full cost one is kind of at the upper middle of the range. And then we get down to the front loaded phase in getting you a combined charge of 11,948. And then the even phase in would get you for 2023 to a charge of 95.89. I should also mention that in all the updated scenarios, we are assuming the full cost water and storm drain SDCs effective March 1st of 2023. And so then really the difference is that sewer SDC. And so then the overall conclusion is that you can justify increasing the SDCs, and then we have our existing charges on the left, and then the proposed charges effective March 1st of 2023. And so there are 3 different options here: full cost on the right, even phase in, and then front loaded phase in between that, sort of in ascending order. And then ultimately, increasing the SDCs would provide additional funds for debt repayment and capital investment, and by virtue of that, potentially provide relief to existing ratepayers. And the city can balance equitable cost recovery with the objective of incentivizing or perhaps not disincentivizing development. You can phase the increases over time, or you could adopt charges lower than the justifiable maximum. But again, anything that's not recovered through SDCs ultimately falls at the ratepayers. And so that's the end of the formal presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Councillor Hoffmeyer, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, and I think this is the 3rd time at least we've looked at these, the average age of resident in Oak Harbor is roughly 30. The average age in Anacortes is nearly 50. So, in a way, think of Oak Harbor more as an entry-level city. Though not all costs suppress growth, I think council was very astute that it could here. I'm 38. I haven't made my millions yet. Spent 19 years as a teenager. Don't do the math. And I think 19 years being broke, and feel free to do the math on that part. Typically I'm typically one of the more sensitive to cost increases, etc. But following Chris's final comment, about it otherwise being placed on the ratepayers, and just distributing this as fairly as possible, I could support option 3 myself. So that's where I'm at. And thanks for all the great work you guys have done on this.
Sure, thank you.
Councillor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, thanks for all the work. Here's my thoughts, and it may not be everybody else's thoughts, but this is just my thoughts. Option 3. However, I would like to see it start in June of 2023, not March. I don't think March is enough time for us to get the word out to developers, give developers time to find a piece of property and get the piece of property vetted under the current program. I mean, if we're going to use this, let's use it smartly. Let's maybe try to get some development off the ground. Let's maybe try to get something moving forward. I don't think 5 months heads up is enough time to accomplish that, and I think we would be cutting our nose off to spite our face. The 750 square feet I'm kind of okay with, but when we take that down to 652 square feet of living space, I think that's a little tight. I think we should be using numbers closer to the numbers we're seeing as the living space numbers, and not be correlating to that 652, 1178, et cetera. I think the 751 to 1400 should be to 1600. Even your Portland study showed that there really wasn't a change in number of people in the house until you got up over that 1600. That 1200 to 1600 area was pretty darn flat. In fact, with 1200 to 1750, it looks like it's pretty darn flat. Families do build bigger homes these days, and by doing the way we've got it, stopping at 1400, everything over 1400 is considered a non-affordable house. I mean, the whole idea of this, right, is to promote affordable housing. So the way you've got it right now, 1400 to 1800 is one ERU. So anything under 1400, anything over 1400 would be considered non-affordable. I think that's a little tight, again, for today's lifestyles. So I think a little tweaking in the square footage. I think some tweaking in the date it starts. I like option 3, putting it in and not front loading it. We're in the middle of a kind of a crazy time in the economy, right? Where we are going to need to do everything we can to stimulate development. Developers are not coming out the woodwork like they were 2 years ago, I think front loading it doesn't give enough incentive as we come out of the back of this. I mean, maybe the backside of 2023 before we actually start seeing development taking off again. It takes a while for everybody to gear back up, I think we've closed that window by front loading a lot of this. Again, that incentive for that next kick. My final thought is I think ADUs should fall in the bottom category, no matter how many square feet they are. They don't require as much infrastructure to install. They're using existing sewer lines and existing streets, et cetera, et cetera. We have a limit on size. Most ADUs are not going to be a second family living there. It's going to be a, mom and dad or something like that. And I think ADUs, quite frankly, with the fact that we've got, areas of the city that were developed back in the day with, 9,600 and 12,000 square foot lots, that can really handle an ADU. I mean, under today's current code, they could handle 2 houses, but to incentivize them to put an ADU there, I think we shouldn't limit it to that 750 square feet. I think if it's an ADU, it should be the smaller. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiesner. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. I've got a few thoughts on this. The inflationary increases, I understand where you're coming there, that we would have been higher, but it's our fault that we didn't have these regular increases. So to come on all at once seems extremely aggressive to me. I had concerns about this last time we talked about it because of the state of the market. The state of the market now is worse. The real estate companies, Zillow, Redfin, they're laying people off by the thousands. Home builders, private and public, are shutting down projects. We're coming into a point in our country where we're going to see a huge downturn in real estate development and sales, and everybody's dropping their prices. I mean, you look at the houses that are available in our own city, and we're seeing houses drop their price by $50,000 just to get the thing to move, and we're going to raise the price. I think we missed our opportunity to take the price increase when everybody else was, and now we're coming in at the downside, and we're going to jack the price up. And in a place like Councilmember Hoffmeyer said, in a place like Oak Harbor, that will have an impact on us. We're not on the mainland. We don't have the same accessibility. That's going to have a huge impact on us because people have to make a decision to build here. The builders that are already starting their process, they've already looked at their project, they've already done their budget, they are looking at the viability of that, and they're saying yes, so they've submitted paperwork to the city with intent to do something. I would not want to see this impact those. The presentation that we had yesterday for annexation, that's going to be a multifamily project coming down the road. Well, they're looking at that right now, budgeting that thing out to see if they can afford to do it. But, by the way, we're going to sock this on you right about the time that we're going to approve you for annexation, which changes the entire formula. Again, that could wipe that builder out and prevent them from building us the homes that we need. The service development charges, yes, we could use that to pay down some debt, but we can't use it to reduce our rates to our payers because SDCs are not guaranteed. I mean, if we have nobody building any homes, we have no SDCs. So we can't use that for debt repayment. I mean, we can pay lump sums, yes, and then we can reduce, but we can't use it for any sort of credit that it's going to be consistent coming in because we don't know. Comparing us to other cities, similar to what Councilmember Hoffmeyer said, we're not other cities. We're Oak Harbor. We're on an island. We're very different than any city that I've ever lived in, and I think that we really need to look at what's right for us. I appreciate the info from the other cities so we see what they're doing, but we really do have to look at our situation. And if we don't put this in, it's going to be on the ratepayers. I understand that, but if we put this in, it'll probably still be on the ratepayers because we're not going to have the production that we're all hoping is going to bring this millions of dollars in. In regards to these tiers, you know, similar to what you were saying, Councilmember Wiesner, we're trying to get affordable housing in here, and from what I can tell, you know, a starter home for most families is 1,400 to 1,800 square feet. So I would love to see tier 1 up to 1,800 square feet. We can't be putting roadblocks in front of everything that we've all campaigned on, been in office on, the housing action plan. Everything that we're trying to do is trying to reduce cost of building so that way we can have some affordable homes. We've got the density changes that we just dealt with on the critical areas. That was a great conversation that's going to help with that. This just seems like it's going to be a roadblock for us. And with the ADUs, I completely agree with you. I don't think we should be penalizing people for taking advantage of that space that we do have in our city because we don't have much. So I think this is the wrong time for this. I think it will not be as much of a benefit as we're all hoping. And according to our finance director, we're in a good state of affairs right now, so we're not desperate, so let's not act like it. Thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree. We missed the boat on raising these SDCs for quite some time, but I don't think that we can continue to kick the can down the road forever. I mean, at some point, it's going to catch up to us, and if we don't implement them, you know, I have a hard time because I know I didn't campaign, obviously, but several of you did on the rates, you know, and this is an opportunity to lower the debt service. It's an opportunity to not put that burden on the ratepayers. I mean, they made it very clear that if we don't increase these SDCs, the burden is going to be borne by the ratepayers. And so, that is who we're beholden to, you know, not the builders so much as the ratepayers, as the citizens. I would agree with the three-tiered approach of phasing it in over time, and I would agree with the June timeline. That gives more opportunity to alert the developers and to make that known. And I'd also agree wholeheartedly not to put this burden on those who have already submitted paperwork. I mean, they've got a budget that they've been working on, and I would hate to see this derail what they've been doing. So I don't think this should apply to any current projects or anybody that's submitted pre-apps or anything, but only on new that would take place after June. And so that would be my input, David, is I would support the three-tiered, and I would support starting that in June.
Thank you. Councilor Munns.
Thank you. I agree with Councilman that we can't keep kicking it down the road, but I also agree with them that we can't stop progress either. When we, 08, 09, somewhere in there, they found out that we had never done any type of rate study on our utilities. None. Zip. Nada. And people are still complaining because they paid $36 a month. That was it. And it's like, no, we can't live there. You know, we're not we're not a town of 300 anymore. But we did it over 5 years. What would the difference be? So 23 and go up 5 years. Add 2 more years to it and make these amounts a little bit less. I I don't know. The ratepayers aren't going to see a difference until we've paid off a significant number of the debt. So they're still going to be paying the same. We've stabilized that, we believe, with income's indication for 3 years that we're okay. If we gave the public 3 years, why not give the builders, 5 years, why not give the builders 5 years? I'm just, how do we get a compromise? We can't kick it down the road, but we can't make it so high that it's not, we're not being responsible for the money. So how, I'm grasping. You guys are smart. So how do we bridge that gap to come up with a compromise that is going to work? So with the 5 years?
Yeah.
Go ahead, thank you.
So if we were to change the sizes of the homes with those scaled SDCs and spread it out over a longer period of time, we did not have it affect anybody that had submitted any type of paperwork for a project prior to June. Is June even far enough?
Yes.
Guys, I agree, we can't kick it down the road. We do need to do something here at some point. But at the same time, like I said, we're coming into a horrible time for real estate. I've got 60% of people pulling out because they can't afford the new interest rate. They cannot afford the new interest rate. The payment on a $500,000 house a year and a half ago, was $2,100. Now it's what, $3,100? That's not affordable. It's nowhere near affordable.
Why not January?
Why not give us a year to get through this mess that we're in and see if we can get this thing worked out and spread it out over 5 years, and see what we can do. And that also gives some of these builders an opportunity to get off the dime if they got a project. Let's get these things going, and maybe we can get some building done during this downturn if they've got a benefit to them. So I'm looking at how are we going to get houses in this city in the small spaces that we do have without penalizing people at the same time. And I hope you guys all do understand that this money it's not guaranteed. So we can't use it to reduce our ratepayers' rates until we have a lump sum that we can actually pay the debt down, and then we can do another rate study and see what their rate's going to be, and then we can make that change. This isn't going to be, hey, we got SDCs, everybody's going to take a dip in their rates. It just doesn't work that way. So that's why I'm trying to look at this in a way that we can be cognizant of all the scenarios that we need in this city. Yes, we need ratepayers, we need them happy. They're the people that currently live here, but we have a lot of people that work here that would like to live here. We have businesses that don't even have employees because they can't get a place for them to live here. Which is affecting our sales tax. It's affecting our opportunity for people to be able to shop here. It's just a trickle effect that continues to hit everybody. So this isn't really a benefit for any one specific ratepayer, builder, homeowner. This is a full encompassed situation that we're in. So I think we do need to be very cautious of that. So I would love to see that bottom tier be up to 1,800 square feet, and then the 18 to 2,600 and larger. And I'd love to see at least a year before we started implementing this. And yeah, maybe putting it over 5 years, that would be something. But I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 12 months either. So I might be kicking myself in the backside just for saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Evans. I agree with Councilmember Wiesner and Marshall, some of their thoughts. I like option 3. I agree with implementing it in June. I think that anybody that has anything already in the pipeline, obviously this doesn't apply to them, and that gives some developers time to get off their duff and start the project if they were kind of on the fence about it, knowing that this is going to be increased. We absolutely need to encourage ADUs as much as possible. And I agree with tweaking the square footage a little, maybe not necessarily up to 1,800, but at least 16. Definitely agree with that. you know, currently we have some of the lowest costs in the region, you know, and developers aren't exactly flocking here and things aren't building up. So I'm not entirely sure that, you know, implementing this, phasing this in, to be specific, you know, is going to be doom and gloom. It might be doom and gloom anyway. You know, it's one thing for a developer to pass costs on to a buyer, but it's a whole other thing to have our taxpayers subsidizing developers. That's what I don't want to happen. So, yeah, for me, it's option 3, start it in June instead of March, maybe tweak that square footage a little. And I see that Blaine Oborn has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to speak to the implementation here because it was talked about pre-apps and grandfathered in. Pre-apps is really just a preliminary review, and a lot of them don't come in. So I really don't see that as an opportunity to really grandfather it in. It certainly is difficult for us. On the bureaucratic side, we have to be able to understand the rules and apply it. We did discuss that earlier with other things. Right now, they do it when they do the building permit. So when people take out the building permit is when they play the SDCs. If they take out the permit before on May, if we do a June 1st implementation, they're into our office on May 31st. They pay the current rate. They come in the next day. They're going to pay the other date. So that's kind of the way we have it. We don't have it on when they do the development. Somebody could do a development and be granted. You could do a development and never build a home for 5 or 6 years later. So it's really hard for us to really understand and grandfather in those kind of people. But if you're trying to focus on the date here, look at, you could build it on the anticipated, well, when somebody's going to take it from a project to when they're going to actually start building homes. And if you want to be cognizant and give more time, that's the way to do it. So it does have a tier approach. I think the consensus here was in the 3 years. So even if somebody gets stuck with it, they're not getting the whole area there. So they do have some time over it. So if with a 3-year approach here, and if you're going out to June, and then I assume we'll do all the other ones from a year from June and do it that way as we pushing it out from our March date, I think was the consensus. So there's still have time even if I'm developing it. And I do have a kind of a clock running, and I could kind of still digest what rate I'm going to probably be paying when I'm ready to pull the permits for the housing.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. Councilmember Munns,
Also,
I believe you were next.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to add something.
Oh, sorry.
Real quick.
Go ahead, David.
So if we get rid of the first 3 tiers and just make them all up to 1,600, that may affect the number, the ERU calculation and the average square footage area. So that might actually negate the savings that a house up to 750 square feet or a house up to 1,400 square feet will have, because I think the number of ERUs will increase because the average size will be greater for that category. But Chris, you can kind of clarify that if you don't mind.
That is correct. So what we're seeing in the estimated living area column is the average living, I mean, except for the 1,400 to 1,800 group, but for 750, 751 to 1,400, that's the average living area of the homes that are in that size category. So if we lump a bunch of them in, the average is going to go up. And so maybe someone who has 1,400 square feet might get a lower ERU assignment, but someone who has 750 is going to get a higher ERU assignment.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. Mr. Goldman, did you have anything else before we go back to council comments?
So I was thinking, if we were to change the 1,401 to 1,800 to 1,601 to 2,000, that would affect the ERU assignments for the categories surrounding it. But that might be something that might be worth looking at. If that was my understanding. That I think that may have been mentioned by Councilmember Wiesner.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Munns, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Tim. I'm not sure if it was 08 to 012 or just after 012. Development Services, and tried to bring in more development because inflation was starting. They delayed that they didn't have to have their permit and maybe the SDUs paid until occupancy. So it gave them time. There was sadly no increase in building because they delayed that. And so, no, but they gave them more time to collect money and do this and this. Instead of having to put more out, they could put more into the building supply. So I'm just saying, this could backfire by waiting a whole year. I don't really know. I'm just saying that we tried something, they thought it was going to work. Other cities were doing this, and no one really seemed to be bringing people in to build. They just weren't going to build. They didn't care what it was. They just weren't going to build. So, yeah. Thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You know, Blaine, you actually sparked another problem in my mind that you probably were hoping you didn't spark. Picture a developer, 10 months into permitting. Yeah, we're going to get your permit out next month. We're going to get your permit out next month. Oh, 2 planners are down sick. We can't get your permit out next month. Next day, rates go up.
Now your permit's available.
Now your permit's ready for pickup 2 days after the rates went up. Sorry we didn't get it to you 2 weeks prior to the rates going up like we promised. Right? So, I'm going to suggest, and again, this is in the idea of just knowing how developers think, and if we want to actually use this as a tool to maybe get some stuff going while we're in this downward, right, that what would be so terrible if we allowed to have people vest their system development charges by paying for them up front, and we allow them a 6-month period then to, right? I mean, you get where I'm getting at, right? Because, 3 weeks prior to a system development charge thing, you guys are going to have a lot of pressure to get some permits kicked out of that office. And if you fail, you could be causing a developer hundreds of thousands of dollars could be at stake. So, how do you deal with that? Well, you get ahead of it, right? And if I could buy and pay for my system development charges up front, hold those system development charges for 6 months. If I don't use them during that 6 months, I get a refund. I got to pay the new rates. I'm no longer vetted, right? So this prevents somebody from buying and holding these things for years and years. But it's going to solve a problem for our planning department and our planners and our people in permitting. There will be a development that we're going to be working up to the nth hour just before these rates make an adjustment. It's going to happen. Thanks.
Is David Kuhl is our development services director on the line?
No, he's on vacation right now,
okay.
but
I can speak to that.
go
yeah, Steve,
at the
please.
mic, please.
Yeah, no, I really like the creativity and the discussion that's happening because, right, this is a big deal. This is a multi-million-dollar deal that will affect developers and ratepayers. And I agree. I mean, we are heading into, it's amazing what has happened just in 6 months from 3% to 7% to get a mortgage rate. So I think the discussion is good. I think, and this is where I can't confirm, but I think it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to typically get a building permit. Is that what would you say? Just for the house alone?
Well, I'm thinking PRDs. I'm thinking,
Well, not the
vetted
full development
plans.
process, right? I mean, that can take, like Mr. Oborn said, that can take years, right? I mean, if someone's starting with raw land right now and wanted to go through the process, that's a multi-year process, right? To go from raw land and then to go and get preliminary plat and to go and do all the utility improvements and then, right, finish all that, go through final plat. That's many, many years. I'm just saying if someone's ready to go and when they pay it at building permit, they would turn it in. That would be typically, let's say a 2 to 4 week process. And so I've heard these discussions before, and I think your ideas are very good, but I would caution you because by going outside the state law and creating kind of our own how you pay, the unintended consequences are huge. And Ms. Evans, our city attorney, could maybe speak to this too. There might be good ways that we can do it, but I just know it can really backfire very hard when we create our own vesting process outside of state law. So
Well,
that was just my
and
feedback.
You get what I'm concerned at is those ones that are right at the end of the project. And that's why I'm kind of talking like the 6 months, right? And you're right, you got a PRD that's been through a 2-year process, right? And now we're right up against the date of year 3 price change, right? Everything's been based on year 2, right? And we're 25 days from having this short plat completed and 3 weeks from having the building permit in hand. Something happens and we don't miss that 25-day deadline. And now we have just cost that builder who's been through 2 years of work.
Yes.
In that last few months, something happens on our end and we just cost him $100,000.
So I can't speak to the Oak Harbor process, but I've been through this before in a King County jurisdiction and a Snohomish County jurisdiction. And so you're right, it's due at the time of building permit. So now you're ready to build a home. And so a developer that was part of that process would know when that date would be, and they would know when they needed to submit for that home. And they want to give themselves a couple of weeks head start to make sure they can meet that date. And I know we've got an amazing planning group, so I know previous where I've been, we'd be very sensitive to working, if there was somebody that was kind of stuck in that gray area. But does that make sense? Am I making, what we're talking about is a couple week, just if they got it in a couple weeks early, they'd give themselves, let's call it a cushion.
I'm talking about the end of that PRD before you can submit that building permit. And let's face it, that's where a lot of PRDs get stuck, is that very last little, we have to sign and record the Mylars, and we got to have all the information right on those. And if there's one word wrong on those, it's got to go back to the printer to have the Mylar changed before we can record that plat. And we can't get a building permit until we record that plat. And, I can just see us getting stuck where we're causing the issue, or like I say, a couple planners get sick and the next thing you know, we can't perform.
Yep. So I would say, continue to ask those very, very good questions and be creative. I would just caution you that I'd prefer, I think, that council do what I heard from quite a few council members is move it to June. It's still due at the building permit. You're not messing with the whole state law and when things are vested, but you're moving that date out. And keep that as part of our normal process. And that's how you'd address that issue, right? By making sure you give people plenty of notice. Don't create this kind of two systems where there's a due date and then there's when you're vested.
My concern would be these next incremental increases, right? And again, a developer who's doing their due diligence, they've turned in all the paperwork on time, and we've just delayed the process. I mean, let's face it, we could intentionally delay a couple of permits if we were, right? If it was going to get a extra $3,000 instead, or it could be construed that possibly we delayed the issuance of a PRD to slow down the persons being able to apply for the. I mean, it could be inferred. It could seem that way. And so I'm not so much concerned about the first date. You get the first date. In my mind, the reason we give some time is for, maybe some guys with some small infill projects that are just sitting on the fence, and this gives them time to get those projects done. Certainly somebody coming in, starting a new PRD today isn't going to meet that first deadline, but maybe they're shooting for that second deadline, which is 19 months out, which probably is a pretty reasonable assumption for something straightforward, say a 12-lot plat with no critical areas, etc. But then what happens when we get down to that very end and we missed the date by a day. The day costs a ton of money. And so I just want to make sure that we're not backing our staff, you, Mr. Schuler, into a corner when that happens a year and a half from now or 2.5 years from now, at those steps. So I'm not as concerned about that first one as I am those step dates, because there's no flexibility in those step dates. This is the date, price changes. And if you don't have your building permit to turn in on that date, that's it, no matter what the reason, even if we're the ones who held you up, even if, we just needed to sign on the dotted line and we missed the day to do the signature.
Thank you, Councilor Wiesner. Before we move on, I want to refer back to our guidelines that we went over in the council rules and stuff, and one of those things was to trust but verify and operate and assume that staff is operating in good faith. I understand the hypothetical nightmare scenario, but I just want to be cognizant of what we're putting out there, and that is certainly a nightmare scenario, and we want to go to the worst possible conclusion and make sure that that's not going to happen. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are operating, that staff is always acting in good faith. Somebody in planning is not going to intentionally hold something up for a few $1,000s that they're not going to benefit from. So just hypothetical scenario. Councillor Hoffmeyer.
First of all, to address, some of the concern that Councillor Wiesner is discussing, unless we're precluded by state law, could it simply be that it's the date that the permit is submitted? So that's a question I would have there.
I wish David was
And then the other question I have is on the the phasing in, whether that's 3 or 5 years. Mayor Pro Tem, would you consider polling the council to see if 3 or 5 years is preferred?
Yeah, we can certainly do a poll. Councillor Marshall, do you have a 3 or 5 year? 3? Shane? Ryan? 3? 5? 5? And I'm 3. So I think that's 3 3s and 4 5s. All right. Does that conclude your comment? Okay.
Maybe you can do the difference.
Yeah, maybe work the numbers. Councilmember Marshall, you haven't spoken a second time yet. Do you have anything else? Oh, yeah, no. We're going to take a break as soon as this topic is over. Yeah, same. Thank you. Okay. Okay. In fact, if we have several more comments, we can take a break right now. Are we about wrapped up? Councilmember Evans, do you?
I've got a comment.
Okay, you're next. You're next, okay.
I'll keep it short and sweet for
Thank
you,
you.
though, Councilmember Marshall. So the more homes that we build, and do I know whether reducing this or delaying it is going to bring in more homes? I have no idea. But I do know that raising the price will affect if it's going to be less homes. And in regards to the ratepayers, the one benefit that they get out of that is the more homes that we have in this city, the more ratepayers we have, which means the less that the ratepayers are paying. But let's look at one scenario. We've got a project in this community where they are in the process of getting ready to build 48 homes. Okay? Let's say they've pulled 5 permits for that. They've done their due diligence. The whole thing's budgeted based off of our numbers that we publicly make available to them. So they know where they're at on their project. Now, we've got to change for them based on when they pick up their permit. Now, they've already started the project. They've pulled 5 permits. They're building 5 houses, and they're getting ready to go pull the rest, and we have our date change. Well, on that 48 homes, if we go from where we're at now to where full-blown, that'd be a difference of $418,000 on that project. Now, tell me that that wouldn't affect you as a developer to decide whether you're going to move forward or not. But you're already in. You've already done it. You've already made the commitment with the city. So I don't know that when we pull the permit, because he's not going to pull all 48 permits at once. He's going to pull them as he's going. So we need to come up with some logical way for these people that are making an investment in our community and helping us with our housing problem to be able to deal with that. Because if they're already in and they've already started a community of 48 homes, wouldn't that be horrible if he stopped at 5? I mean, $418,000 on a project, guys, they're not making loads of money. You know, there are margins for a reason, and they do that so that way they can build the house most affordable that they can. But we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to come up with a creative way to deal with this, because when you're going to pull the permit, I mean, a 48-home project, that could be 2 years. So, and that would affect his project.
Good
points.
points.
Won't even see it coming.
Good points. Thank you.
Eric Marshall, your excuse.
Chris, Mr. Gonzalez, do you feel like you have a direction or the ability to tweak some of these numbers and come back to us?
So, yeah, I mean, my understanding is it sounds like the majority preference is to do a 5-year phase-in. We're going to reshape the tiers a little bit, and I think based on what I heard from David, maybe have that middle tier be 1,600 to 2,000, and then kind of adjust the other tiers as necessary, and then assume that it's going to be phased in evenly rather than front loaded. But I think that captures what we've been talking about.
And June 1st.
Yeah,
Oh,
June
June
instead of
1st, yeah.
March, yeah. Okay, yeah, I know we send you back to the drawing board every time we have this conversation, but yeah, that sounds like a good summary. Go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
In regards to the square footage, one thing that drives me nuts is arbitrary numbers, just throwing numbers out for the fun of it. I would like to look at what the entry-level affordable housing square footage home average is in Oak Harbor, so that way we can put these numbers in place. Otherwise, we're just arbitrarily picking 1,600 square feet and saying,
point.
there we go. Can someone look into that and see what the average square footage for affordable housing or entry-level homes in the city of Oak Harbor is? So that way we can make this an educated decision?
Yeah, it's important we have the ability to justify the numbers that we're putting out there. Yeah,
Thank
makes
you.
sense. Okay, thank you. Okay, if we have nothing else, then we are going to take a brief recess. So we're in recess 5 minutes. race you to the bathroom. Going to. Thank you. All right. Move.
It says calming for your time.
Calming. It's very. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great timing.
And now, with his very calming presence, our city engineer, Mr. Alex Warner, will present traffic calming.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I am Alex Warner, the city engineer. So this was intended to be a joint presentation between Public Works and the police department. However, Captain Slowick was called out just recently, so he did want me to send his regards, that he wished he could have been here. We did work on this presentation with Chief Dresker as well. And Slowick was all dolled up. He looked very handsome. It's really a shame that he wasn't able to come out here tonight. So we've got an update for council was requested by, I believe, a couple of council members on our traffic calming program. I'll start out by giving an overview of what our current traffic calming program looks like. So the goal of our traffic calming is to increase roadway safety by implementing solutions that reduce speeding, collisions, injuries, and fatalities. And then we have this 3 E's of traffic calming you may have heard of. There's an education component, enforcement, and engineering. So our current program, we intake the concerns from citizens via phone, email, or our website, the Contact Us link. So it's our responsibility in Public Works and engineering specifically to respond to the citizens that gather further details and request that they complete a citizen action form. So this is our citizen action form. It's filled out by the citizen. It's identified as either accident or speeding or an other concern. They need to describe the location and also get signatures of 5 other household members, household owners on the street in question for speeding concerns. We also have this brochure that talks residents through the process. So this was implemented and last updated in 2006. So on the other side of the brochure is a flow chart, and that gives, again, the citizens an idea of what they can expect. So we collect data, we analyze the data for speeding, we put out speed counters, or we notify PD if there is an issue, and then we look at possible warranted best management practices for the traffic calming. So again, we start with education, then go to enforcement, and then engineering, typically in that order. And then we notify the citizen of either an action or no action to follow up with them. And there is the budget component. We need to always keep in mind our staffing and budgetary restraints. So here's where Captain Slowick was going to jump in. So as part of their enforcement, they do have visible patrols. They have traffic emphasis, radar trailer deployment. You may have seen those out around town. Telling you to slow down. So they are data driven, and rather than going out there with an unknown, they have targeted locations based on data that we in Public Works can provide them. It could start with a concern, and then we get traffic data for speeds and the amount of vehicles speeding, and then they go out and can do their enforcement. They also are key in the education component of traffic calming. So they have community presentations and materials, they do school activities, and the law enforcement events. So since 2006, we've had over, yes?
Oh, hi. I just wanted to jump in. I know Captain Slovic and Chief Dresker mentioned to me that they are looking at some new speed trailers and have really awesome technology where you can change the graphics. And I know from my experience in King and Snohomish County and also talking to the police department here in Oak Harbor, those are really effective because what's nice is those neighborhoods that call, they can go and deploy those speed radar trailers. So one, it's like the government's listening to me, right? Because there's an issue and boom, right away, here's a speed trailer on my street. And so I'm very excited about the technology that allows you to really better communicate. Instead of just like flashing your speed, there's messages you can provide and things like that. There's data so we can get speed information and real-time data. So I'm very excited that and just want to kind of emphasize that that's something they're looking at, and you should be looking for that information in the future too. Thank you.
So historically, since 2006, we've gotten over 80 citizen action requests, and the majority of those do not warrant an engineering solution. So we'll send it over to PD and say, hey, this is an area that has some speeding, but doesn't warrant putting in a speed hump or a flashing beacon or a speed limit radar sign. So here's some general costs. I'll give you an idea of the BMPs we have historically been implementing. We put out speed humps, and those are not to be confused with speed bumps. These are the ones that are about 14 feet long and 2 inches high, and they're more gentle than a speed bump, but they do typically get vehicles to slow down closer to 25 mile an hour speed limit. We only apply them to 25 mile an hour speed roads. So they're typically put out in pairs, and with the material, labor, signs, all of that, it came out to be approximately $12,000 for a set of speed humps. Then we also have what we refer to as RFBs, or the rapid rectangular flashing beacons. Those have been put out at Fort Nugent Road at the park there. We replaced some inroads with RFBs, and then they were also put out further out towards Howard's Point development. We put in a RFB there. And those are solar powered, which is nice. We don't have to do any electrical conduit or anything, but they are about $14,000 for a set of the RFBs for the enhanced crosswalks. We have speed limit radar signs. Those have been put out at O'Leary. Oh, you have a question?
That RFB, is that what's going to go at North Whidbey as well? Where the lighted crosswalk used to be, North Whidbey Middle School?
Yeah, we have discussed that, and I don't know if we've come to a resolution on that. That was an oversight during the paving, but typically we have been going out and replacing inroads with RFBs.
It's something, I mean, working next door to there at the pool, that's something I've probably had 100 people mention, and I know I had chatted with Steve about it as well, so perfect. Thanks.
Right, and that's trying to get to that standard of RFBs, because it's a known commodity. A lot of other communities in the state use those, and we've begun to implement those. So I can get back to you with a firm answer, but yeah. The speed limit radar signs, those have been put out again on Fort Nugent Road down in the dip by the golf course and on Northeast O'Leary. Those cost about $7,500, and we typically again put those out in pairs. So historically, the funding has come straight out of the Streets Operations Fund. We haven't had a set aside dedicated specifically for traffic calming. So there's always been this push and pull of, okay, we're competing with, the funds for crack sealing and potholes and the other costs that the Streets Department bears. So with this new biennium budget, we have set a traffic calming budget funded by the REIT for $30,000. That's what we felt was an acceptable and appropriate budget amount. But as you will see, that doesn't cover a whole lot of traffic calming BMPs from an engineering perspective. Additionally, for the last 9 months or so, I've had to inform residents that have put in a citizen action request that there is a BMP warranted, but we don't have any funds to implement it. So essentially we have some backlog there as well. So with that in mind, you can kind of see it's not a very sustainable program right now with the amount of requests, the amount of warrants, and the lack of, or the shortfall of funding for it.
Would it be possible that anytime one of them speed bumps is warranted and the funding's not available, that council could be informed of that? Because I think that's news to some of us.
Okay. Yeah, I can gather that information and bring it to you.
Thank you.
So that brings us to our Safe Streets for All. And I presented back in September to apply for a grant through the Safe Streets for All. It's a bipartisan infrastructure law. So what this does is it opens a pot of money to implement traffic calming, but we have to establish a safety action plan. So that was a grant we applied for. We're waiting to hear back if we've received that, but I'm very optimistic on it. So that safety action plan develops a holistic, well-defined strategy to prevent roadway fatalities and serious injuries, and is to include policies, procedures, and projects to establish safe streets for all. So with that coming, this next year, potentially into early 24, some things we could expect from that are, the new methodology in traffic calming. So again, this is being run by the IRTPO, headed by the IRTPO. It's a joint action plan with Island County, Island Transit, ourselves, Town of Coupeville, and the City of Langley. So some of that new methodology, here's one known as the Vision Zero, and this has been adopted by cities across the country. And the Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. And now it's gaining momentum in major American cities. So I think this might come up as a recommendation that we adopt this policy. You see the language, eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries. And that lines up pretty nicely with the Safety Action Plan grant, develop a holistic, well-defined strategy to prevent roadway fatalities and serious injuries. Also, as part of Vision Zero policies that can be adopted, the statement here on the 3 E's of traffic calming, which we have in place now, it's a century-old approach. It needs to be revisited. While the individual E's have a role to play, they need to be better evaluated for shortcomings and held to a higher standard, especially in the terms of effectiveness and equity. So the safe system can develop or deliver more effective, equitable results. We handed out a sheet at the beginning of the meeting, and that's info sheet on Vision Zero. And what really it's showing is speed is the common factor for injuries and fatalities. So how do we reduce speeds? And what benefits do we see by reducing speeds? So this graphic here I have on the slide is showing the fatality rate at which pedestrian vehicle collision occurs at these given speed limits. So reducing from 30 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour, it cuts the fatality rate by more than half. So it's pretty striking to see the reductions just by slowing down 10 miles an hour. This here is showing that your focus on the road and your field of vision opens up the slower you go. So I've noticed this personally on
on East Whidbey, when we restriped that with bike lanes, the lane widths went from 13 feet to 11 feet. And just anecdotally, I've been noticing more things. Like, oh, hey, yeah, the fire department, the pool, we've got all these things right along the road. So I don't know if you guys have been noticing that, but it has been proven the slower you drive, the more your peripheral vision opens up, the more you tend to notice. So some new technology that's already in place around the world. There is automated traffic enforcement systems. So the authorized uses of that can be for stoplight violations, railroad crossing violations, school speed zone violations, and speed violations. So there's already 29 jurisdictions in our state that have adopted an ordinance for these systems. This is, your ticket by mail, sometimes referred to this. And here's a list of the jurisdictions in our city that have adopted it. It was actually quite a lot more than I had expected. I'd heard a lot about Linwood with the red light running ticket system, and I know that had a lot of publicity when they implemented that, but it's gaining traction in other cities as well. So this one I found pretty interesting. I think it kind of goes in line with all these electric cars. The National Transportation Safety Board is recommending technologies and new vehicles to prevent driving over the speed limit. So we could be seeing that in cars on the road in the next 5 to 10 years. It's another self-enforcing traffic calming. There's also a push nationwide of rethinking our roads. So this was an article that was passed on to me in the Everett Herald just a few weeks ago. It was titled, "The City's Streets Need to Be Returned to Pedestrians." So this photo I have over on the right is a city street in San Francisco. I want to say the early 1900s. And what's interesting is it's a grab from a video, and you see bicyclists, horse and buggy, early cars, street rail, people going straight, left, right, all over the place. You wonder how are they not getting into collisions? Well, watching the video, you see they're all traveling about 5 miles per hour. So it's just a really extreme example of reducing speeds reduces collisions. So in that article, they did state that in 2007, pedestrians accounted for 11% of all traffic deaths. In 2021, their share was 17%. So we need a future of safer and more sustainable cities with mobility that is more inclusive, equitable, and healthy. And following the data that they referenced there is from the Governor's Highway Safety Association. And another stat that is pretty eye-opening is there's been a 53% increase in pedestrian fatalities in the last 10 years nationwide. So again, to recap some of the items that may be recommended as a safety action plan, could be the automatic traffic enforcement, speed limiters, narrowing lanes, could be a speed limit reduction citywide. There's also a new movement to create these 20-mile-per-hour villages, usually in defined developments. You would enter and you would have kind of a visual change to show that the community or the neighborhood expects 20 miles per hour rather than our standard 25 miles per hour. But it is good to keep in mind with any of these changes, especially speed limit reductions, we can't just go out there and change the speed limit on the signs. All that will do is increase the amount of speeding violations, and we know the PD does not have the resources right now to go out and do additional speed enforcement. So speed reductions will come with other things such as new striping or hardscaping. But that all comes with a cost. So with the safety action plan coming into place in the next year or two, I really think this is an evolution of our traffic calming program. So what I'm hoping the safety action plan will do is change our program from being reactive to proactive. We'll go from a complaint-based driven analysis or complaint-based response to analyzing the entire city system and having a more focused implementation with the limited funds that we do have. And as I mentioned before, the limited funding, it's really a first come, first served response that we have. We could have 12 streets around the city that warrants a speed hump, but if we're not getting citizen action requests, then we just don't see it right now. So the safety action plan will be a systematic implementation of traffic calming. So here's something that's already been deployed. We have a new web submittal form, and Sabrina was nice enough to give us a rundown of the new features of the city website this morning. So we'll continue to accept the citizen concerns, currently known as citizen action requests. It's now an online form, so we've already sunsetted that brochure and the hard copy that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation. And what's nice about this, can't really see on this slide, but it has more categories than just speeding or collisions. There's also, you can select crosswalks, several other items to really focus in what the concern is. So with that safety action plan, the thorough analysis of the city street system will emphasize safety improvements that have the greatest benefit to cost ratio. The citizen concerns will be documented and considered alongside the safety action plan. But all of this will need that pool of money through the Safe Streets for All for grant funding, because we've just seen we do not have the local funds to keep up with traffic calming. So that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Do we know how many injury accidents we have per year on average in Oak Harbor?
Specific to pedestrians or just in general?
Injury accidents.
I know from Slowick.
You do?
Oh, do you have the?
You're going to say it.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We were just speaking about that with Captain Slovic. And so, yeah, he's run the last 5 years. And so he's going to get us that data.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that'd be very good to know, so that way we know what we're trying to fix.
Yeah.
Yes. And the data is not as much as you would hope for. And that's a state issue. And so there's things that go into the state program. And just speaking as someone who would love to see better data, it's not what I hoped that it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the categories aren't broken down enough, so things just get lumped into all the different categories. So
Well, and if everything got lumped in where, somebody broke a fingernail, I'm fine with that.
yeah,
Because, since 2006, we've had 80 citizen complaints. That's 5 a year about speeding. So,
Well, and just to clarify or give you a little more information on that, a lot of times we get a concern that doesn't go to the level of the citizen action request,
Okay.
where they have a concern, they never fill out the form, they're not able to get 5 signatures, we're able to resolve it before it gets to a citizen action request. So we do get a lot more calls and concerns from the public than 5 a year.
because I totally get it. I've got, 4 kids that I raised, and I've got 3 grandkids, and, I don't want them getting run over by some person speeding down the road. I'm just wondering how much of a problem is it in our city?
We see 5 or 6 people get hit by a car.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's pedestrians? Okay, thank you.
for those watching at home that couldn't hear, our fire marshal just said from the audience that we get about 5 or 6 pedestrians a year hit by vehicles. Okay, who is Councilmember Stuckey? Shane's already spoken, so
So fatalities is something I know a little bit about. So, not that it's a laughing matter, but obviously there's all kinds of accidents and speeding, and we'll often hear about this road being unsafe and people speeding on that road, but regarding fatalities, the one thing I didn't see in here, most fatalities that I see, and I do see all of them that happen in these situations, is motorcycles. And I didn't see anything addressing motorcycles specifically. I assume that most of those calming devices would also work for motorcycles. I mean, if a motorcycle is speeding through, does those radar trucks, do they catch those and everything too?
Yes, they do. And I think that kind of gets to the limitations of what we can do. There's always going to be people out there that disregard a radar sign. They disregard the speed limit, the sharp curve up ahead. So we can't implement things to the point where it's making the streets unusable. So there is a balance there. It's just kind of the reality of what we're working with.
And actually, when you say motorcycles, I think you bring up a very good point, Councilmember. We know this is going to be a growing trend, and it's not my area of expertise yet, but I think it will have to be. As you know, we've got electronic devices now that can run all sorts of bicycles, scooters, skateboards, 1 wheels, 3 wheels, and those are increasing every Christmas, right? And all sorts of different electronic bike options now. And so, as I understand it, by law, you can go up to like 20 miles per hour with just doing this pretty easily, and it's getting easier every single year and more powerful. And so we're going to see more and more of those on the streets. And so those fall somewhere between, pedestrian and a normal bicycle going 8 miles per hour. And that's a huge difference when you're going 20 miles per hour versus, 7 to 8 on a typical bicycle. So that's going to be a constant need. And that's where not only the feds are coming down and saying, you local cities need to do a better job. And then the state, by requiring this active transportation plan that the council just approved, that's the state coming down saying, local governments, you need to do a better job. So one thing I'm saying is, the citizens are getting through to the state and through to the feds and saying people need to do a better job, and that burden is being placed on us. And so through this active transportation process you're going to go through, and this safe, I always forget the second S, safe, the SS for all, that's going to come down. We cannot get federal dollars to do transportation projects until we have a plan in place and we actually implement it. And like what we just talked about with the 80 transition plan, these are all getting pretty serious, and people are filing lawsuits, and cities are really facing this. So yes, it's kind of a local issue, but we need to be in front of this, would be my recommendation, and do it in a way that really makes a benefit to your local communities too.
And you were referring to e-bikes there, I assume?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All of those. I'm
right.
Sorry. Yep. E-bikes for sure.
Okay. And my other question, and I don't think you can answer this. This would be more of something for Captain Slowick. There are areas that I think most people would say are more problematic, streets that are more problematic. How often is an officer there posted up? I'm not talking about Highway 20, which would be state patrol. I'm talking about like Regatta, where it goes to 35. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't gone over 35 there, and the moment I get warned, I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah, I'd have to defer to the police department.
That's what I thought. I appreciate it, though.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a comment, and great presentation, Alex. In some cities, and I've never personally seen the flashy light, on the digital sign telling me I'm going too fast, but I've heard that, in some cities, they have just a basic strobe at the bottom of it, and some of them I've seen the red and blue strobe at the bottom of. I've heard about the red and blue. And I've heard that my common sense is it's a little more compelling. You see that red and blue flashing light, and it not only tells you, hey, look at me, that this sign is flashing at you because you're going too fast, but it reminds you of what you could be seeing behind you. So, if we could consider sourcing those, see if there are any additional costs to the ones with the clear strobe. I think that might get a little bit more attention grabber. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Schuler, do you know what do the radar signs, do they also record that same information as the trailers do? And then what's the cost of the trailer versus the sign? I know the signs are at $7,500, but I didn't see a price for the trailers.
Yeah, so Captain Slovak is looking into that, and the short answer is that they are coming up with speed trailers now that, you can get almost every kind of version that you want. And so there are some cost implications, but the basic trailer's X dollars, and to get some of these additions, it's getting cheaper and cheaper every year. So, the options are really opening up to get something that really has the right kind of lighting, that has some science behind it about what really makes people change their opinions. They have ones that will record your license plate. You can get a lot. And I'll let Captain Slovak really come back and get into those details with you, but not that we would necessarily, issue a ticket, but someone can be getting a warning in the mail saying, here's your picture, you were going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, and we just wanted to let you know. So, you are really going to have a lot of options available to you on that. So that's a great question.
What does Captain Slowick think about the ATESs? Are they generally, is the Oak Harbor Police Department generally in favor of trying to implement those, or what are their thoughts on those?
I can't speak on that for them.
Okay.
I'll let them come back and give you their more detailed opinion on that. Yeah. Okay.
And then, Alex, other than the Safe Streets for All, are there any other grant opportunities available for some of these traffic calming? And if not grants, then sponsorships perhaps of like the RFBs. Could we get if a community service group, for example, identified the need that they want to place these or they want to purchase them for that crosswalk that Councilmember Hoffmeyer mentioned? Is that a possibility? Could a service organization adopt a side or adopt a crosswalk, for lack of a better term?
I don't know of a current program in place for that, and I would need to talk with finance about kind of those cost implications. Then, first part of your question, there's a Safe Routes to School grant program. I know the city has gone after those in the past, not since I've been here, but that's another route of funding that specific to those school zones. I'm not currently aware of any other specific grant opportunities for traffic calming.
Okay. And then my last thing would be just being in a paper business, I would encourage continuing to have a hard copy available because not everybody gets on the internet or can use the internet. And so for those that still want to have the opportunity to file that or to make that, I would still recommend having hard copies available for those people.
Okay. Yeah, that's something we can look into with an updated form so it's in line with what we have on the webpage.
Councilor Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, I would say in roughly 2013, I would say is probably when the Safe Route to Schools paid for that crosswalk there on East Whidbey, for instance, and quite a few others.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do we need to extend the time?
Nope.
No?
Okay.
Not for workshop.
Okay, I just heard some beeping over here.
Yeah.
We're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Go
Oh,
ahead.
you're fine. When we're talking about being proactive, with traffic calming, and I understand that on East Whidbey those en route flashing lights got overlooked. That happens. But I would say in the future, I hope that we really make sure that similar things aren't overlooked, so it's paid for out at the time. Southeast 4th Avenue, for instance, specifically between Eli and Midway. That road tends to be the Daytona 500. I think the only thing currently slowing the people down are the potholes that are there. But as we overlay that road next summer, or as we totally reconstruct that road, will the scope of that reconstruction or overlay include speed bumps if warranted?
it's something that we can look into. I don't have it in a plan right now. That's one of the streets that we're going to be replacing a water main, so the overlay will follow.
If that's something you could look into at least.
Yeah,
And
and
then more on the safe route to school theme, right there by, right on the corner of Southeast Fourth and Midway by Surrey Pest Control. There's a small section there that does need a sidewalk. On the safe route to school theme, I had chatted with the superintendent at the school district, and they are willing to write those safe route to school grants as well, possibly having more success, or very willing to sign on to any of our grants to try to further that request. And another place where the superintendent had mentioned they would be willing to do that is on West Whidbey Avenue between Jib and Heller, where the sidewalks are needed there. That more than willing to help write that as well. So I think partnership's always good. But yeah, I would just like to hope that we're being as proactive as possible, so we're not having to double back and do something after a project's finished. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration.
Mr. Oborn.
Yeah, Chief Dresker is online to answer some of the police department questions if you want to utilize his expertise.
Okay, yeah, on our next round of comments, we can certainly circle back to some of our police department specific questions. Chief Dresker, do you have anything that you want to add to the discussion, or are you just here for questions?
No, unfortunately, I've just gotten here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But I was preoccupied and not able to be here before now. So ask any questions, I'll answer them.
No worries. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. I apologize, I don't remember who asked the question, but something about, police enforcement or response to public complaints. I've had lots of conversations with citizens about a couple of trouble spots, and the one I think I've heard the most about is Southwest Barrington and Fairhaven-ish there, up that hill through that neighborhood on Barrington. And I think the last 2 or 3 times I drove by that intersection, somebody was pulled over there. So, or there was an officer within a block of that area. So, we are listening, and as far as personnel and bandwidth will allow, responding. So I love the online form. I think that is exactly how we should be engaging with citizens and allowing them to engage with us. That is so easy, and it doesn't require you to take it around your neighborhood and get a bunch of signatures, and it has options. Love that so much. I will be sharing that for sure. And Councilmember Hoffmeyer made a point during your presentation about coming to us if there is a need for a specific, if really there's a demonstrable need for a speed hump or a radar trailer or something, and you don't have $14,000 lying around in your budget. If you came to council for a special purchase or budget amendment or something, I would certainly welcome that conversation. We might not be able to make it work every time, but if there's an incident or a rash of complaints and, $7,500 is all that's standing between us and actually taking action, please bring that to us instead of waiting for a budget cycle. I think we're happy to spend a few minutes hearing that. And I'm really excited about the radar trailer technology. And I think that this, the safety ties into the transportation plan and making our streets more bike friendly. I have an e-bike, and downhill that puppy will get up to 30 miles an hour. It's scary. And there are definitely some streets that are better than others when it comes to riding around. Regatta with no sidewalk at all there at the end is pretty freaky. But then again, Barrington up that hill is tons of room. So I think that there's a lot that we can do to make things safer. And I appreciate the increased police presence, really appreciate the online form. And definitely come to us if there's something that that you're looking to do that needs to be done immediately, but you don't have the funds for. I mean, we would at the very minimum be willing to hear you out for sure. Go ahead.
And just for the record, with Chief Dresker here, I did not promise any additional police enforcement. So I just want to make that abundantly clear.
Understood, and thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, you're safe tonight.
Thank you. Any other council comments, questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to administration. Discussion of City of Oak Harbor legislative priorities for 2023. We have our Communications and IT Director, Sabrina Combs, in person.
Hello.
Go ahead.
It is nice to be here in person, I will say that. Got to get used to it, but it's great. So, this evening, since we've crossed over into that time frame, I am going to be speaking to you about the draft legislative priorities for 2023. So I'm going to start off. Oh, I always want to make sure the clicker's working. I'm hitting it, but it's not. I don't think it likes me, Tim. There we go. Thank you. So first off, in 2022, the legislative priorities that we set, including these items that you're seeing on the screen. And so when we go to build the next set of legislative priorities, a lot of times what we do is look at last year's, see what we had on the list, and compare that to the AWC 2023 legislative priorities to see where we're in sync with those concepts and make sure that, are there any changes or additions that we need to make around that. In looking at that, what we realized is we had a lot of priorities on our list that were still consistent, but we needed to just modify them a little bit. So some of those areas are things like economic, and we also talked about recovery as well as economic development. And so we just changed that to economic development. We also fine-tuned some of the things around transportation enhancements, as well as the invest in local infrastructure. And we changed some of the language around workforce housing, so it's included in the description, but the title itself is housing availability, because that's a new terminology that's being used. So that's a lot of the modifications that we made. And again, they were very small, but they were to address what we saw as the current trends that we wanted to focus on. So the next steps that we're going to do is, if this is approved by council, the mayor's office will send these off to our legislative contacts to make them aware of our priorities. And then in addition to that, in some of the work that we've done this year on things like the I&I project with legislators and finding additional grant funding, what we've realized is that it's really great if we have something that's off the shelf, that's a quick document that talks to them. It stands out a little bit more when it's on the legislator's desk. Instead of seeing a letter, they see actual descriptions and images that really tie to that program. So we have about 2 to 3 projects that we're working on right now that will include a detailed item that we know we're working on trying to get funding for. And then we have that document available for grants or lobbying when the city administrator is talking to folks. He also has it. And so we're working on those with departments right now. So with that in mind, the recommended action is the motion to approve the draft legislative priorities so they can become our official priorities for 2023. And then that's it. So I want to thank you for your time and find out if you have any questions.
Councilor Munns.
Thank you. Sabrina, be sure to send this to AWC.
Yes.
Because if they have it, even though we may not have everything they do, they will keep ours handy so that they can also advocate for it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. We have a distribution list that we follow.
Great.
Councilor Wiesner.
Yes, thanks for thinking about the lobbying brochures. I've, and I totally agree that when we're placing this document on somebody's desk, right, that we want it just plain, simple, a 2-minute read, right? That's all we're going to get out of it. But what I've always felt we lacked here was, now that we're going to be back, hopefully going down and having a face-to-face and a sit-down dinner with our legislators, is actually telling them what they could do within these categories, what projects they could help us with specific things, and that lobbying brochure is going to do that for us. So I want to be able to actually say, hey, protecting AS Whidbey, and here's a way you can help us do this with this specific item. And so I think that's a great idea because, again, we are switching back to that point where we are going to have that one-on-one. And if you get us each those lobbying brochures, right, we occasionally end up running into some of our legislators, and you get how it is. It's repeated. I mean, everybody needs something today in this world, and everybody wants something, but it's the folks who have the same consistent request and a justification behind that request and that little blurb as to why we need this. Those are the ones I think that are, going to get the attentions, especially now that we're back to face-to-face. So thanks for putting those together. Appreciate it.
Yep, we will get those to you. And I want to thank staff for that. Part of this idea came out of some of these recent conversations about grants, and it made us realize, and then recently Ginger Pennington came to me and said, Sabrina, I have some stuff that came up that I really want to make sure that we're talking to legislators correctly about this. And I thought, this is the second or third time somebody's brought this up. We should have a better document. And so we've started working on those because I think it will help. So we will make sure to get those to you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoffmeyer.
Looks good. I like it. The first sentence at the top there, continue to advocate for funding and legislation that makes Oak Harbor a great community. Great priority. It's awesome that it's at the top. I wonder if it's worth having a second place on there as well. I think with regards to the debt forgiveness conversation on the clean water facility, I feel like we are making great progress there. I feel like every single representative we have is very aware of the conversation, and I do wonder if it's worth having it replicated in a second place, maybe in a little more detail, but it looks wonderful. Thank you.
And Councilmember Hoffmeyer, that's one of the pieces we're working on as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other council comments, questions? I want to second my approval of I appreciate the language. I've past our priorities would kind of use more passive language, and we don't just want you to support funding for now it's like we actually won't expect our representatives to advocate for us, and so I appreciate the use of less passive language, and while there's certainly a lot of detail that can go into some of the support documents, I think that the synopsis is enough for them to get the idea, and then they can look into it further. So, excellent job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the backup documentation. And is there anything else? Okay, thank you, Sabrina.
Okay, great. Oh. Do we need to do the motion, or are you guys good?
No, they don't do a motion here. We'll just put it on the consent agenda.
Okay, just want to check.
Yeah.
Checking my dots.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I want to jump in real quickly. I can apologize to Mr. Oborn for skipping out on his admin report, but I have to be somewhere. But rest assured, I did read every page of it, Blaine, so I do appreciate that.
Second?
No. No worries. Councilor Munns.
Mr. Oborn, could this be, since we got head nods, what a great job for the priorities, could that just be on the consent agenda, or does it have to be a motion?
We'll just put it on legislative priorities. We'll put that on the consent agenda since there wasn't any input.
Yeah, efficiency. Okay, all right. City Administrator's report. Go ahead, Mr. Oborn.
All right, I was just doing notes here to do my quicker version and cut out about 20 items here so we could get out of here. So just kind of continuing on the lobbying issue, talked about the progress we're trying to have on the mayor's effort with the sewer debt relief issue. So good communication with the state, and I think we're going to make that as one of our specific priorities there on the debt relief, and we've already made it with the letters that went out, and so we'll share additional information. Another item, unfortunately, we'll have to campaign against the grant is the conservation easement acquisition for the Bells Farm. Unfortunately, Camino Land Trust would-be Camino Land Trust is really not working with us, and they were approved at the RCO level, and now it goes to the governor and the legislature, so that's where we have to pose it on that. I think they were in error, said that it had widespread community support, so very disappointed that they ignored the city and at least one of the county commissioners that opposed that project, and so it's key to our development here and to avoid future growth there. And then the economic development, the 1081 Pioneer Way property purchase is progressing. More to come on that in the future. And lastly, two more items. Park and Rec Director starting on November 30th. And last item, not in here, but I just have an update, is our Public Works Director is making great progress on the U-Haul access road and coming up with a compromise win-win that's kind of in the dollar range that the council wanted to be in. So that concludes my comments.
Any council feedback on the city administrator's comments?
Okay.
Thumbs up and thank yous. Good. Okay, so moving on before we adjourn, is there any other comments from council? Anything for the good of the order? Any future agenda topic requests? Go ahead, Councilor Evans.
I just want to say that I think we had a really effective workshop today. I appreciate all the comments, and I think we did a good job today. So thank you all.
I concur. I appreciate everybody's enthusiasm and their passion, and I really appreciate your patience as I'm trying to keep track of how many times each person has spoken to make sure things stay even. So I really, I appreciate your patience with me and your understanding, and we have a real, I think, collaborative atmosphere, and everybody listened respectfully to everybody's points and waited their turn, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. All right, anything else?